All right, now I am in Illustrator, and I have saved my file as an Adobe Illustrator file. That is the working format for Adobe Illustrator, but it can't be opened by any other program. So the file that I actually like better, or the file format I like better than AI, is EPS. So I'm going to say File, Save As. This is going to be Carl Assignment 6, black-white vector, black-on-white vector. Instead of an AI file, an EPS file. Now EPS is still a vector file format. Vector file formats cannot go online. But I want to compare the two. Okay. So I have two here. I have a PNG file and an EPS file. I'm going to open them both up. Just by double clicking, they'll open both up in preview. Here is the EPS file. What happens the more I zoom in? That's as far as I can zoom in.
It doesn't become pixelated.
Yeah, it's still perfectly smooth. It's just matching the screen's resolution. And I can even see, oh, there's like a little weirdness there that I'll have to fix in Illustrator, where the path that defines that vector shape jogs in a little bit there. But look at the curves. Nice and smooth, nice and clean from that EPS file. Now let's look at and I'll zoom out. And you can see little problems here. Like this little spot, which I'll erase out. It has its own defined shape. It's not just a pixel, it's a defined cutout shape. I like what it did to all my little marks in here. I even kind of like that. I think I need to work with it a little bit. Okay, now let's look at the PNG. And if I zoom in on this, what happens very quickly? My preview is glitching a little bit. Let's go back to it. Yeah, it gets really fuzzy really soon. It also is not just black and white, right? If you look at the edge, not nearly as useful as this image, which is just a black cutout. The other thing we can look at is size. So if I look at the PNG, the raster image, it is almost 1 megabyte in size. It's 979 kilobytes. I right click and say Get Info. Where if I do that with the vector, it's less. It's fewer kilobytes, and yet can be a much higher resolution. So which one would print better? The EPS would clearly print better, especially on something like a laser printer or as a silk screen on a t-shirt or on a sign. But this isn't finished. This isn't perfect. This is not a refined logo, even if I'm going for a funky logo. I need to now use Illustrator as the program to change and edit and refine my vector. I actually like how it hooks in here from one side. So that's one approach to logo design and vector building, and it's often what I do because I am not the biggest fan of vector programs. But I will do something by hand and then what's called live trace it or vectorize it into Illustrator, which I'm in right now, and now I can use the tools within Illustrator to refine it. So easiest thing to do, use the little lasso tool to select little areas. And so that little piece, and I can zoom in quite a bit within Illustrator, this little spot is actually made up of 4 anchor points and a path. And if I wanted to, I could stretch the anchors on that path and make that shape something different. And you can see the Bezier curves here. And I can use those to change the shape of that path. And And I'm just using what's called the small selection tool, what I call the small selection tool, the white arrow. It says direct selection tool. It allows you to select an individual anchor point and adjust its properties. So even just with those 4 anchor points, by using the Bezier curves, I can turn that into a pretty interesting shape, because I can edit the curve on both sides of the anchor. And it's perfectly clean. And then if I just don't want the thing, I can select it and delete it. Just hit delete. Now there is no white in this vector. Remember, when I traced it, I asked it to ignore the whites. So if I use the large selection tool here, the black arrow, I can use that to stretch the whole thing. Actually, I like it a little bit taller. That E comes out much cleaner that way. You can always Command Z. And then Shift Command Z to redo. Yes, let's see, maybe I like it like this. So using the large selection tool, you just click anywhere and it will select everything. Broaden it out just a bit. Command plus zooms in. Command minus zooms out. But how do I actually change it? Now this is where it's quite different. Okay, so I'm going to save this as an EPS. Just keep saving it. This is altered from my sketch a little bit. And now I'm going to try to clean it up. So to do that, I zoom in and I look for those little errors that I found. Ah, there's one. So these are the kind of common glitches that will happen and when you live trace, no matter how smooth you try to make it. So you see how it jogs there? There's 2 different anchor points there. So what do? I use the small selection tool, the white arrow, and I click on that path so I can see the anchors. And what I can do is I can use the pencil tool, my favorite tool in Illustrator. And if I double click on the pencil tool, I can choose whether I want it to be more accurate or more smooth. In this case, I want it to be more smooth. And I say OK. And then I'm going to draw, as long as it's a selected path, I'm going to draw a line running through at least one anchor point. And it will recut out that shape. And it created a bunch of new anchor points for me. If I think it created too many anchor points, I can go to the tool that's underneath the pencil tool, which is the smooth tool. And that will help decrease anchor points the more I run it over. And if I'm going for a really corporate looking, super slick logo, I'm going to want to smooth it a lot. But for what I'm going for, just kind of this indie logo design kind of approach, I'm not going to be smoothing it unless I really need to, in areas where glitches need to be taken care of. All right, so to really understand how Illustrator works, we have to try to create something just using Illustrator. Because without understanding how it works, you wouldn't be able to fix things like this that happen. In this case, I need to erase it out, and then I need to select it with the small selection tool, and then I need to redraw it with the pencil tool in the way I want. Seems like a lot of steps to go through just to fix that. And that's just because vectors are very different than raster files. Or if I wanted this to have a different shape, I have to redraw it with the pencil tool. If I want this to have a different shape, I need to redraw it with the pencil tool. There are shortcut keys that are helpful. When you're using the The pencil tool, which is my favorite, you can hold down Command and get right to the small selection tool, the white arrow, direct selection tool. And that allows you to just select areas and redraw them, because of course they have to be selected before you can redraw. And this is like magic scissors. If you think of Illustrator as cutting out paper to make your images, the pencil tool are like magic scissors that can take away, but they can also add more paper to your selections. And remember, there's no pixels, there's just white space with this black shape on top of it. And that white space isn't even there. If it was on a red background website, it would be red. If it was on a yellow background page, it would be yellow. If it was on a business card that was light gray, it would be light gray. So let me show you how to build a logo from scratch within Illustrator. And then you'll understand how to do it that way in case you might want to. Yeah, kind of like that. Or if you want to do what I've done here and kind of work between a raster program and have it live trace. So I'm going to save that. Okay, now I'm going to try to recreate this logo just within Illustrator. A really good practice. If you want to lock your shape in its proportions, you hold down Shift as you transform it with the large selection tool. Okay, now in order to lock it, we have layers in Illustrator. And layers are completely unnecessary for the program, but are very helpful for the artist. They're an organizational tool. So the layers are more like groups. And within each layer are all the different paths involved. So there's a path here I don't even think I want that was generated when I live trace that I don't actually want or need. So I'm going to get rid of that. When you live trace something, it all comes in as just one shape, take it or leave it. But when you create your own image in Illustrator, so I'm going to lock that layer and create a new layer, just like you do in Photoshop. When you create your own, it's going to save each path as its own, each thing you make as its own asset within that layer. So what's the easiest tool that's most similar to Photoshop? Well, let's use the brush tool. But this time, double click on the brush, and you'll see, do you want it to be accurate to what you draw, or do you want it to be smooth? For a logo, I want it to be smooth. And do I want to fill new brush strokes or not? Well, let's try not. And I want it to match me within 12 pixels. That sounds pretty good. Okay? Now you'll notice it won't let me use the brush. And that's because I live traced as a silhouette. So to do that, I need to now copy what I have, and I need to change the file type. So I'm going to copy this, Command C. I'm going to open a new Illustrator file, File New, and I want it to be a print file. And I'm going to call this Test Illustrator, or Carl, Illustrator made logo. You don't have to say your pixel size or anything, because vectors, it doesn't matter. Now, because it's a print format, it will allow me to use the brush. So if I start to use the brush, haha, there it is. But I'm going to paste in first what I want. So I use Command V, paste it in, use the large selection tool, move it up into a corner. So I'll put it in this corner. And now I'm going to lock that layer, create a new layer, and I'm going to try to create it with the brush tool. Okay. First, let's try to paint the stump. So it looks really pixely as I'm painting. Well, let's fill that in. And then when I let go, it smooths out. The problem is, notice that it made everything one even width.